and Twitter and Google have massive power. They have a monopoly on public discourse in the online arena. I will say it's dismaying listening to the questions from our Democratic colleagues, because consistently the message from Senate Democrats is for Facebook and Twitter and Google to censor more, to abuse their power more, to silence voices that Senate Democrats disagree with more. That is very dangerous if we want to maintain a free and fair democracy, if we want to maintain free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of a free press. And yet there's an absolute silence from Democrats speaking up for the press outlets censored by big tech. There's an absolute silence for Democrats speaking out for the citizens silenced by big tech. Instead, there is a demand, use even more power to silence dissent, and that's a totalitarian instinct that I think is very dangerous. At the same time that big tech exercises massive power, it also enjoys massive corporate welfare through the effect of Section 230, a special immunity from liability that nobody else gets. Congress has given big tech, in effect, a subsidy while they become some of the wealthiest corporations on the face of the planet. Mr. Dorsey, I want to focus primarily on Twitter and ask you initially, is Twitter a publisher?
Is Twitter a publisher?
Yes.
No, we are not. We distribute information.
So what is a publisher?
An entity that is publishing under editorial guidelines and decisions.
Well, your answer happens to be contrary to the text of federal statute, particular Section 230, which defines an information content provider as any person or entity that is responsible in whole or in part for the creation or development of information provided through the internet or any other interactive computer service. Let me ask you, was Twitter being a publisher when it censored the New York Post?
No, we have very clear policies on the conduct we enable on the platform. And if there's a violation, we take an enforcement action, and people choose to commit to those policies and to those terms of service.
Except your policies are applied in a partisan and selective manner. You claim it was hacked materials, and yet you didn't block the distribution of the New York Times story that alleged to talk about President Trump's tax returns, even though a federal statute makes it a crime to distribute someone's tax returns without their consent. You didn't block any of that discussion, did you?
Our policy was focused on distribution of the actual hacked materials.
Did you block the discussion of the president's tax return material?
And in the New York Times case, we interpret it as reporting about the hacked materials.
Did you block Edward Snowden when he illegally released material?
I don't have the answer to that.
The answer is no. You haven't used this in a selective manner. Let me ask you, were you being a publisher when you forced Politico, another journalistic outlet, to take down their tweets on a topic that you had deemed impermissible?
No. We were enforcing our policy and our terms of service.
So on October 15th, Jake Sherman, a reporter at Politico, tweeted the following. I tweeted a link to the New York Post story right after it dropped yesterday morning. I immediately reached out to the Biden campaign to see if they had any answer. I wish I'd given the story a closer read before tweeting it. Twitter suspended me. So you actually have a reporter reporting on a story, asking the other side for comment. And Twitter says, hi, Jake Sherman, your account at Jake Sherman has been locked for violating Twitter rules. Now, what did the Politico reporter do? Immediately tweets after that, my goal was not to spread information. Well, that's a little worrisome just in and of itself. My goal was to raise questions about the story. Oh, my overlords in Silicon Valley, I was attacking the New York Post. You don't understand. I was attacking them, as I did in subsequent tweets, and see how the Biden campaign was going to respond. They later did respond. And then, not long after, Jake Sherman comes back with, my account is clearly no longer suspended. I deleted the tweet. When Twitter is editing and censoring and silencing, the New York Post, the newspaper with the fourth highest circulation in the country, and Politico, one of the leading newspapers in the country, is Twitter behaving as a publisher when it's deciding what stories reporters are allowed to write and publish and what stories they're not?
No, and that account was not suspended. It fell afoul of the hacked materials policy. We realized that there was an error in that policy and the enforcement.
Hold on. I'm literally looking at the tweet from Twitter that says your account has been locked. You're telling me that this is not an accurate...
That's a lock and can be unlocked when you delete the...
I understand that you have the star chamber power. Your answer is always, well, once we silence you, we can choose to allow you to speak. But you are engaged in publishing decisions. Let me shift to a different topic. Mr. Dorsey, does voter fraud exist?
I don't know for certain.
Are you an expert in voter fraud?
No, I'm not.
Well, why then is Twitter right now putting purported warnings on virtually any statement about voter fraud?
We're simply linking to a broader conversation so that people have more information.
No, you're not. You put up a page that says, quote, voter fraud of any kind is exceedingly rare in the United States. That's not linking to a broader conversation. That's taking a disputed policy position, and you're a publisher when you're doing that. You're entitled to take a policy position, but you don't get to pretend you're not a publisher and get a special benefit under Section 230 as a result.
That link is pointing to a broader conversation with tweets from publishers and people all around the country.
Mr. Dorsey, would the following statement violate Twitter's policies? Quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud.
I imagine that we would label it so that people can have more context and read through.
How about this quote? Quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political activists voter fraud is particularly possible where, quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political party activists are involved in, quote, handling absentee ballots. Would you flag that as potentially misleading?
I don't know the specifics of how we might enforce that, but I imagine a lot of these would have a label pointing people to a bigger conversation.
Well, you're right. You would label them because you've taken the political position right now that voter fraud doesn't exist. I would note both of those quotes come from the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform. That is Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker. And Twitter's position is essentially voter fraud does not exist. Are you aware that just 2 weeks ago in the state of Texas, a woman was charged with 134 counts of election fraud? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
If I tweeted that statement with a link to the indictment, would you put a warning on it that says, well, the Democratic Party position right now is voter fraud doesn't exist?
I don't think it's useful to get into hypotheticals, but I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? Well, we're going to test that because I'm going to tweet that and we'll see what you put on it. All right. Yesterday, Mr. Dorsey, you and I spent a considerable amount of time on the phone, and you said that you wanted to embrace transparency. So I want to ask you, I have asked Twitter, I've asked Facebook multiple times, how many times have you blocked Republican candidates for office, their tweets or their posts in 2016, in 2018, and 2020? How many times have you blocked Democratic candidates for office? How many times have you blocked Republican office holders? How many times have you blocked Democratic office holders? Twitter has repeatedly refused to answer that question with specific hard data and cataloging the examples. In the interest of transparency, which you said you want to embrace, will you commit in this hearing right now to answer those questions in writing?
And we'll exactly what we want to do.
Question. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dorsey, I didn't hear you.
That's exactly what we're pushing for as we think about building upon 230.
Is that a yes that you will answer those questions in writing?
Transparency, not just of outcomes, but also our process as well.
Is that a yes that you will answer those questions in writing?
We'll certainly look into it and see what we can do.
And actually answer them and not give lawyerly doublespeak about why you're not going to give specifics. Answer them. Will you commit to this committee that you will answer those questions?
We're going to work to answering broader transparency around outcomes.
All right, that's a no. Mr. Zuckerberg, how about you? Will you commit that Facebook will answer those specific questions, cataloging the number of instances in which Democrats in 16, 18, and 20 have been silenced versus the number of instances in which Republicans have been silenced on Facebook?
Senator, I'm not sure if we have that data available, but I will follow up with you or your team.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes, and I'm going to take Twitter. We'll see if it's a yes or transparency is bogus and we don't intend to provide it.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We live in a dangerous world. Issues of national security, the worst pandemic, public health crisis in modern times in America, and we are being challenged as to whether there's going to be a peaceful transition of power in America in the presidency. At that moment in time, we decided none of those topics were important, and what was important was to determine whether or not social media was discriminating against Republicans. It's an interesting question. I think there are more important and timely questions. We have a recount underway in Georgia. We have allegations made by the election officials there, where the Republican election officials, where they have faced literally death threats. We are trying to determine whether or not the social media instruments of America are fair to the Republican Party. I'm trying to struggle with this issue because I want to put it in a context, and maybe I can't. Maybe this is unique. We certainly know what the Constitution says when it comes to free speech, and we know what it meant over the years, New York Times versus Sullivan and others with publications. We certainly didn't suggest that anyone that used a telephone line for nefarious, illegal, banned activity somehow implicated the telephone company into it by its nature. And then came radio and TV, and we had to come up with new rules in terms of, at one time, equal time, fair content, and so forth. And now we have this relatively new mechanism of communicating information, and we're trying to determine what to do with it, whether to treat it like a newspaper publishing or treat it like some sort of a communications network alone. Section 230 is an attempt to do that, and I'm sure everybody finds fault with it. I'd like to ask the two witnesses if they would comment on the historical aspects of this particular debate, if they have any thoughts. Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, one of the points in the discussion that I find interesting is people ask if the regulatory model should be more like kind of the news industry or more like telcos. But from my perspective, these platforms are a new industry and should have a different regulatory model that is distinct from either of those other two. I think it is not the case that we're like a telco, and that there are clearly some categories of content, whether it's terrorism or child exploitation, that people expect us to moderate and address. But we're also clearly not like a news publisher in that we don't create the content and we don't choose up front what we publish. We give people a voice to be able to publish things. So I do think that we have responsibilities, and it may make sense for there to be liability for some of the content that is on the platform. But I don't think that the analogies to these other industries that have been created previously will ever be kind of fully the right way to look at this. I think it deserves and needs its own regulatory framework to get built here.
Thank you. Would the other witness care to respond?
From a historical perspective, 230 has created so much goodness and innovation. And, if we didn't have those protections when we started Twitter 14 years ago, we could not start. And that's what we're most concerned with, is making sure that we continue to enable new companies to contribute to the internet, to contribute to conversation. And we do have to be very careful and thoughtful about changes to 230, because going one direction might box out new competitors and new startups. Going another might create a demand for an impossible amount of resources to handle it. And going yet another might encourage even more blocking of voices, or what's being raised here, which is censorship of voices, and changing the internet dramatically.
So go ahead.
So I believe that we can build upon 230. I think we can make sure that we're earning people's trust by encouraging more transparency around content moderation and our process of it. I think we need much more straightforward appeals. And I think the biggest point to really focus on going forward is algorithms and how they are managing and creating these experiences, and being able to have choice in how to use those algorithms on platforms like ours.
Let me get into a specific, Mr. Zuckerberg. October 10th, Detroit Free Press reported 13 men charged Thursday in a conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer used Facebook and secure messaging apps to connect and plot their attack. The group's use of Facebook spans almost a full year. Members began to use the social media platform as a recruitment tool in November 2019, according to an affidavit by Brian Russell, Detective Sergeant, Michigan State Police. Once recruited, members communicated via a secured encrypting message platform. According to news reports, Facebook alerted the FBI about the Michigan kidnappers' online activity several months before the arrest. Thank goodness. However, in August, a Facebook page for the Kenosha Guard militia, which advocated violence in the aftermath of the shooting of Jacob Blake, was reportedly flagged over 455 times to Facebook. However, the page was deemed non-violating and left up. More than 4,000 people responded to that event. Hundreds of armed militia members showed up. A member of this group, a teenager from Illinois, later shot and killed 2 people on the streets of Kenosha. Mr. Zuckerberg, you described Facebook's handling of this militia page as an operational mistake. Can you explain the exact reason why the Kenosha militia page was not taken down?
Senator, yes. And first, and what happened in Kenosha was obviously terrible. What happened here strengthened the policy to disallow more of those groups, because we were on high alert and we're treating this situation as very volatile around potential civil unrest around the election. We just put that policy into place, and for a number of reasons, it had not yet been fully rolled out, and all of the content reviewers across the company hadn't been fully trained on that. So we made mistakes in assessing whether that group should be taken down. But upon appeal, when it was escalated to a more senior level of content review folks who have more specific expertise in these areas, we recognized that it did violate the policy, and we took it down. It was a mistake. It was certainly an issue, and we're debriefing and figuring out how we can do better. Although one other piece that I would add is that the person who carried out the shootings was not in any way connected to that page or linked to any of the content there from anything that we or others can tell.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask one more question. Yesterday, the FBI released its annual hate crime incident report. The report found that more people were killed in hate-motivated violence in 2019 than any year since the FBI began collecting hate crime data in 1990. The report also found that race-based hate crimes remained the most common type of hate crimes last year, and documented increase in religion-based hate crimes, anti-Hispanic hate crimes, and hate crimes targeting individuals based on gender identity. Given these statistics, it appears to me that it's more important than ever for social media companies to combat hate on their platforms And I might add to one of my colleagues who stated earlier, this is not Antifa, but these are documented hate crimes from FBI. Muslim advocates, Muslim have reached out to you many times, Mr. Zuckerberg, about this issue relating to published content that reflects on certain religious groups. And you said at a hearing you do not allow hate crimes on Facebook. Yet in May 2020, the Tech Transparency Project found more than 100 American white supremacist groups, many of them explicitly anti-Muslim, active on the platform both on their own group pages as well as auto-generated content. Facebook did nominally alter some of the content, but the hate groups largely remained. Are you looking the other way, Mr. Zuckerberg, in a potentially dangerous situation?
No, Senator. This is incredibly important, and we take hate speech as well as incitement of violence extremely seriously. We banned more than 250 white supremacist organizations and treat them the same as terrorist organizations around the world. And we've ramped up our capacity to identify hate speech and incitement of violence before people even see it on the platforms. Our AI and human review teams, you can track our results in the transparency reports that we issue, now take down about 94% of the hate speech that we find on our platforms before anyone has to even report it to us, which is a dramatic amount of progress from where we were a few years ago, where when we were just starting to ramp up on this, we're taking about 20% of it down before people had to report it to us. So there's still more progress to make. We're very invested in this, and you have my commitment that we view this as an issue of the highest severity and one that we are very focused on.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for hosting this hearing. Clearly important topics around content moderation. I'm a skeptic of the content moderation policies that exist, both because I don't think the standards are very transparent and I don't think the execution is very consistent. That said, I'm more skeptical than a lot of my colleagues, I think on both sides of the aisle, about whether or not there's a regulatory fix that will make it better instead of worse. I especially think it's odd that so many in my party are zealous to do this right now when you would have an incoming administration of the other party that would be writing the rules and regulations about it. And I think it's telling that a number of folks on the other side of the dais, I think of Senator Blumenthal, a guy I like, but who seemed to almost be giddy about the prospect of a new government regulatory agency to police online speech. And I think a lot of people on my side should take pause at the idea that so many on the other side of the aisle are excited about having the next administration get to write these rules and regulations. But to the broader question, first, just to get to kind of a level set, and I want to thank both the witnesses for being here today. But when Senator Lee lays out some of the issues he did about, just every human community is going to be situated in a different place about policy commitments and priorities and beliefs. But when Senator Lee said that 93% of Facebook employees who contribute to politics do so on the left, and 99%, I think it was, of Twitter employees contribute on the left. I would just be interested to see if either of the two of you think that has implications in the shepherding of your organizations. Again, I recognize fully that you're private organizations, and so again, I'm more skeptical of a governmental fix for a lot of the problems we're talking about here today. But I'm curious as to whether or not Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, and I guess we'll start with Facebook, I'm curious as to whether or not you think it's likely that there is systemic bias inside your organization in the execution of content moderation policies, given that your employee base is so unrepresentative of America in general.
Senator, I think it's a good question, and certainly I think it means that we have to be more intentional about what we do and thoughtful. Our principle and goal is to give everyone a voice and to be a platform for all ideas. As you mentioned, I do think it's undisputed that our employee base, at least the full-time folks, politically would be somewhat, or maybe more than just a little somewhat, to the left of where our overall community is, where the community basically spans almost wide varieties of people across society. So I do think that means that we need to be careful and intentional internally to make sure that bias doesn't seep into decisions that we make. Although I'd point out a couple of things. One is that people have a lot of different views outside of work, and we expect and I think generally see that people conduct themselves professionally. And second, the folks who are doing the content review work, we have about 35,000 people doing content review, are typically not based in Silicon Valley. They're based in places all over the country and all over the world, because we serve people in countries all over the world. So I think that the geographic diversity of that is more representative of the community that we serve than just the full-time employee base in our headquarters in the Bay Area.
Thanks, Mr. Zuckerberg. Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, this is obviously not something we interview for, and even have an understanding of when people are in the company. And with that understanding, we intend to make sure that both our policy and our enforcement is objective. And I realize that it looks rather opaque, and certainly the outcomes might not always match up with that intention, with our intention, and the perception of those outcomes may not match up. But that's why I think it's so important that we're not just transparent around our policies, but the actual operations of our content moderation. If people don't trust our intent, if people are questioning that, that's a failure. And that is something that we need to fix and intend to fix. And I think it would benefit the industry as well. But I do, again, point back to something I said earlier in the testimony, which is a lot of these decisions are not being made by humans anymore. They're being made by algorithms. And that's certainly enforcement decisions, but also decisions around what you see or what you don't see. And to me, that is the body of work. That is the conversation that we should be focused on, because that is the enduring use case for everyone who interacts with these services.
Thank you, and I wish it were true that these were all easy, objective questions. That the questions were, if somebody says, "Is the sky green?" That's an objective question. That the sky is blue and white, not green. But most of the things we're talking about here, and the places where you're applying content moderation labels, are not really simply objective questions. They're mostly subjective questions. If we talked about Medicare for all being, easily paid for inside a 10-year budget window on assumptions X, Y, and Z that don't raise taxes, that's not true. There isn't any math by which Medicare for all pays for itself in some short-term window. But I don't think any of us really think you're going to slap a label on that saying this is disputed, accounting or math or policy projections. And so really what's happening is there's a prioritization grid that people are going through as they build even the algorithms, even those that aren't driven by humans, and they're driven by policy priorities of situated individuals. I may be wrong about this, but my suspicion is that your employee base is not actually 99% left of center. I bet it's less than that. And I would speculate that part of the reason less than 1% of your employees give money to candidates on the right is because there's a social stigma attached to having conservative views inside your organization. And I would guess that those same sort of internal cultural biases inform the subjectivity of which issues end up labeled. So again, this is sort of an odd place to be in that I am skeptical that the content moderation policies are thought out well. They're not transparent enough for us to really know, but I'm definitely skeptical that they're consistently applied. And yet I'm not really on the side of thinking there's some easy governmental fix here. There's a lot about Section 230 that we could debate. I think some of the things Senator Durbin said about how in the era of telephones, nobody blamed the phone company for other people having spread misinformation by the phone. exactly. That's what would be the case if Section 230 were actually neutral, but you're applying content moderation policies and seemingly in a way that's not objective. So I know that I'm nearly at time, but I think it would be useful for us to hear from both of you to give a sort of 3 or 5 year window into the future. If there isn't new legislation, what is changing besides just saying we're moving from humans to more AI? What qualitatively is changing in the way content moderation happens inside your organizations, short of a new regulatory scheme? Can you tell us where you think you're actually improving and what problems you're trying to solve? Mr. Zuckerberg, you first, please.
Senator, one of the areas that we're very focused on is transparency, both in the process and in the results. So we're already at the point where every quarter we issue a community standards enforcement report that basically details the prevalence of each category of harmful content and how effective we are at addressing it before people have to even report it to us. Over time, we would like to fill that out and have more detail in that and make it more robust. We've already committed to an independent external audit of those metrics that people can trust them even more. People have lots of different kinds of requests for where we might go with that in the future, whether that's breaking down the stats by country or language or into more granular buckets, adding more data around precision. But I think that would all be very helpful so that people can see and hold us accountable for how we're doing. And for what it's worth, I think that would be a valuable part of a regulatory framework that would not feel particularly overreaching to me, is something that could be put in law that would create an apples to apples framework that all companies in this space would have to report on the outcomes and effectiveness of their programs in that way, so at least we can see how everyone is doing. That seems like a sensible step to me.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Senator Whitehouse.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Dorsey's still answering the same question, and then I'll give it back to you in a hurry, Mr.
So
Lay.
sorry, I missed that.
It's a junior acting chairman. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Well, I mean, if we're considering 3 to 5 years out, I think the realization that a centralized global content moderation system does not scale, and we need to rethink how we operate these services. And I would point to, we certainly need transparency around any process that we have and around the practice and the outcomes of those moderations. But I think having more control so that individuals can moderate themselves, pushing the power of moderation to the edges and to our customers and to the individuals using the service is something we'll see more of. And I also believe that having more choice around how algorithms are altering my experience and creating my experience is important. So being able to turn off ranking algorithms, being able to choose different ranking algorithms that are found, written by third-party developers and somewhat of an algorithmic marketplace, I think is important and a future that would excite and energize us.
Thank you. I've appreciated my interaction with both of your companies in the run-up to this, and I think both of you said some meaty things there about ways we can move toward greater transparency, so I'll follow up again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, let me start with just a moment's history to give some context to my questions. When the tobacco industry discovered that its product was deadly, it responded to that news with a systematized program of denying that set of facts. The upshot for the tobacco industry was not great. It was found in federal court to have been engaged in massive fraud and was put under court order to cease its fraudulent behavior. At around the same time, the fossil fuel industry began to run into a similar problem regarding the effects of its product, and it picked up the tobacco industry scheme kind of where it left off, including using some of the same individuals, some of the same entities, many of the same methods as the tobacco industry's denial operation. These are persistent, highly motivated, very well-funded and complex information operations, not unlike a hostile intelligence service would run. And they are quite secretive. And we're now seeing a new form, I guess you'd call it election denial, happening around our country right now. So that's the background that I come at this from seeing. And I'm wondering if each of you see a difference between individual error and basically mass disinformation. Is there a difference between odd people with fringe views who offer personal opinions and an orchestrated plan of deliberate misinformation or disinformation that is driven by motivated interests, whether foreign or domestic?
Senator, I absolutely think that there's a difference, and you can see it in the patterns of use on the platforms. And in our policies and operations, we view these coordinated, inauthentic behavior operations, networks of fake and sometimes combining with real accounts to push out a message, but make it seem like it's coming from a different place than it is, or might be more popular than it is. This is what we saw the Internet Research Agency out of Russia do in 2016. And since then, a number of other governments and private organizations, including some companies like what you've mentioned, have engaged in this behavior. Now, the good news is that I think that the industry has generally gotten its systems to be a lot more sophisticated to defend against that in the last several years. It's a combination of AI systems that we've built to find networks of accounts that aren't really behaving quite the way that a normal person would, coupled with large numbers of content reviewers, sometimes with expertise in counterterrorism or counterintelligence, and then some signal sharing, whether it's with the intelligence community, law enforcement, different groups that have expertise in different areas, and with other tech platforms. But this is a big effort on I think all of our sides to make sure that we can defend against this kind of interference, and I think we are getting better and better at it.
Well, let me encourage you to persist. As you know, the last time you were here, you were asked about advertising paid for on Facebook denominated in rubles, which was not a very sophisticated scheme to be able to penetrate, but Facebook was unable to penetrate it, and your upgrade from that original setup was simply to allow a shell corporation to intermediate between the real actor and not. So I encourage you to continue to try to make sure that real voices are what are heard on Facebook. Mr. Dorsey, let me turn to you and ask you the same question in the context of bots. Brown University recently did a study that showed that about 25% of all tweets about climate change are generated by bots. Most of them obviously push out climate denial, as I described that operation. How is Twitter's capacity to identify a bot as opposed to a real customer?
Well, to build off your previous question, I do think there is a difference, as Mark said, and I do think there are many coordinated campaigns to manipulate the public conversation, to divide people all around the world, to confuse and generally to distract. And we do have policies and enforcement to prevent as much of this as possible. It is a growing threat, and it shows no signs of slowing down. Bots are one way that entities do this. Sometimes it may look like a bot, but it's actually a human that is organized with other humans for a particular agenda. So it is challenging. We are doing work right now to better identify bots on our service.
Let me just interject, Mr. Dorsey, real quick. As a baseline proposition, do you agree that a bot does not deserve a voice on your platform, that it should be actual people and organizations?
I don't agree with that as a high level. I think we should be labeling bots so that people have greater context for what they're interacting with.
Fair enough.
There are plenty of bots on our service that provide a valuable function, and I wouldn't want to take that away.
Let me ask both of you, and maybe you can supplement this with the answer in writing for the record, because my time is getting short and this is a complicated question. But the question is, when does it matter to Twitter and when does it matter to Facebook to know who the actual entity is who is using your platform? Let me start with you, Mr. Dorsey, since Mr. Zuckerberg went first last time. And you can defer to a written answer if you like, because my time's running very short.
We'll add to this conversation with a written answer, but I do believe that pseudonymity is important. We have seen its usefulness with activists and with whistleblowers, and I think that is critical. But certainly there are times, and it's judged by a severity of potential outcomes, where we need to dig into identity and take actions.
We'll follow up with that, and let me just ask you, since my time has expired, Mr. Zuckerberg, to respond or have your organization respond in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we, Senator Whitehouse brought up something very important, and I'm going to add this as directly as I can. To Facebook and Twitter, do you have any internal research or evidence to suggest that your platforms can be addictive? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, I think we can follow up with a summary of research that we have, but from what I've seen so far, it's inconclusive, and most of the research suggests that the vast majority of people do not perceive or experience these services as addictive or have issues. But I do think that there should be controls given to people to help them manage their experience better. Okay. And this is something that we're very focused on.
Mr. Dorsey.
I'm not aware of internal research, but we can follow up. But I do think, like anything else, these tools can be addictive, and we should be aware of that, acknowledge it, and make sure that we are making our customers aware of better patterns of usage. So the more information, the better here.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the late 19th century, the heads of the biggest corporations in America, the robber barons, got together and they set rates, they set prices, they determined how they would control information flow, they determined how they get rid of competition. And I'll be darned if we aren't right back there again. Except for this time, you're the robber barons. Your companies are the most powerful companies in the world, and I want to talk about how you're coordinating together to control information. In recent days, my office was contacted by a Facebook whistleblower, a former employee of the company with direct knowledge of the company's content moderation practices, and I want to start by talking about an internal platform called Tasks that Facebook uses to coordinate projects, including censorship. The Tasks platform allows Facebook employees to communicate about projects they're working on together. That includes Facebook's censorship teams, including the so-called community well-being team, the integrity team, and the hate speech engineering team, who all use the Task platform to discuss which individuals or hashtags or websites to ban. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, you're familiar with the Task platform, aren't you?
Senator, we use the task system for, I think it's, as you say, for people coordinating all kinds of work across the company, although I'm not sure if I'd agree with the characterization specifically around content moderation that you gave.
Well, let's get into that, and let me see if we can refresh your memory and provide folks at home watching with an example. Here over my shoulder is an example. It's a screenshot of the Task platform in use. You'll notice if the cameras zoom in, several references to election integrity throughout on these lists of tasks. Again, this is shared across Facebook's sites, company locations, by working groups. What particularly intrigued me is that the platform reflects censorship input from Google and Twitter as well. So Facebook, as I understand it, Facebook censorship teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter and Google and then enter those companies' suggestions for censorship onto the task platform so that Facebook can then follow up with them and effectively coordinate their censorship efforts. Mr. Zuckerberg, let me just ask you directly, under oath now, does Facebook coordinate its content moderation policies or efforts in any way with Google or Twitter?
Senator, let me be clear about this. We do coordinate on and share signals on security-related topics. So, for example, if there is signal around a terrorist attack or around child exploitation imagery or around a foreign government creating an influence operation, that is an area where the companies do share signals about what they see. But I think it's important to be very clear that that is distinct from the content moderation policies that we or the other companies have, where once we share intelligence or signals between the companies, each company makes its own assessment of the right way to address and deal with that information.
Well, I'm talking about content moderation. I'm talking about individuals, websites, hashtags, phrases to ban. Is it your testimony that you do not communicate with Twitter or Google about content moderation, about individuals, websites, phrases, hashtags to ban? Just yes or no. Do you communicate with Twitter or Google about coordinating your policies in this way?
Senator, we do not coordinate our policies.
Do your Facebook content moderation teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter or Google?
Senator, I'm not aware of anything specific, but I think it would be probably pretty normal for people to talk to their peers and colleagues in the industry.
It would be normal, but you don't do it?
No, I'm saying that I'm not aware of any particular conversation, but I would expect that some level of communication probably happens. But that is different from coordinating what our policies are or our responses in specific instances.
Well, fortunately, I understand that the task platform is searchable. So will you provide a list of every mention of Google or Twitter from the tasks platform to this committee?
Senator, that's something that I can follow up with you and your team after on.
Well, yes or no, I'm sure you can follow up with the list, but why don't you commit while I've got you here under oath? It's so much better to do this under oath. Will you commit now to providing a list from the tasks platform of every mention of Google or Twitter?
Senator, respectfully, I'm without having looked into this, I'm not aware of any sensitivity that might exist around that, so I don't think it would be wise for me to commit to that right now,
so
but I would have to follow.
How many items on the task platform reflect that Facebook, Twitter, and Google are sharing information about websites or hashtags or platforms that they want to suppress?
Senator, I do not know.
Will you provide a list of every website and hashtag that Facebook content moderation teams have discussed banning on the task platform?
Senator, again, I would be happy to follow up with you or your team to discuss further how we might move forward on that. But without
will you commit to it here? Senator Cruz and Senator Lee both asked you for lists of individuals, websites, entities that have been subject to content moderation. You expressed doubt about whether any such information exists, but you've also now said that the task website, you've acknowledged the task platform exists, that it is searchable. So will you commit to providing the information you have logged on the task website about content moderation that your company has undertaken? Yes or no?
Senator, I think it would be better to follow up once I've had a chance to discuss with my team what any sensitivity around that would be that might prevent the kind of sharing that you're talking about. But once I've done that, I would be happy to follow up.
All right. So you won't commit to do it here. We could, of course, subpoena this information, but I'd much rather get it from you voluntarily. But I think let everybody take note that Mr. Zuckerberg has now repeatedly refused to provide information that he knows that he has and has now acknowledged that he has, that Tasks has under oath. Let me switch to a different topic. Mr. Zuckerberg, tell me about Centra. What is the Facebook internal tool called Centra?
Senator, I'm not aware of any tool with that name.
Well, let me see if this refreshes your memory. There's a demonstrative now over my shoulder. Centra is a tool that Facebook uses to track its users, not just on Facebook, but across the entire internet. Centra tracks different profiles that a user visits, their message recipients, their linked accounts, the pages they visit around the web that have Facebook buttons. Centra also uses behavioral data to monitor users' accounts, even if those accounts are registered under a different name. And you can see a shot here, a screenshot provided to us of the Centra platform. We blocked out the user's name in the interest of privacy, although you can see this individual's birth date and age, when they first started using Facebook, their last login, as well as all manner of trackings. How many different devices have they used to access Facebook? How many different accounts are associated with their name? What accounts have they visited? What photos have they tagged? And on and on and on. Mr. Zuckerberg, how many accounts in the United States have been subject to review and shut down through Centra?
Senator, I do not know because I'm not actually familiar with the name of that tool. I'm sure that we have tools that help us with our platform and community integrity work, but I am not familiar with that name.
Do you have a tool that does exactly what I've described and that you can see here over my shoulder? Or are you saying that that doesn't exist?
Senator, I'm saying that I'm not familiar with it and that I'd be happy to follow up and get you and your team the information that you would like on this. But I'm limited in what I can, what I'm familiar with and can share today.
It's always amazing to me, Mr. Chairman, how many people before this committee suddenly develop amnesia. Maybe it is something about the air in the room. Let me ask you this. When a Facebook employee accesses a user's private information, like their private messages or their personally identifiable data, is a record made of that, Mr. Zuckerberg?
Sorry, Senator, could you repeat that?
Is a record made of any time a Facebook employee accesses a user's private information, personally identifiable information, for example, messages? Is a record made any time a Facebook employee does that?
Senator, I believe so.
Does it trigger an audit?
Senator, I think sometimes it may.
How many audits have been conducted?
Senator, I do not know the exact number of audits.
Can you give me a list?
Senator, we can follow up on that to see what would be useful here.
Will you? I'm almost finished, Mr. Chairman. Will you commit to giving us a list of the number of times Facebook employees have accessed users' personal account information without their knowledge? Yes or no?
Senator, we should follow up on what would be useful here. It is, of course, in the operations of the company, if someone reports something, sometimes necessary for people at the company to go review and understand the context around what is happening when someone reports something. So this is fairly frequent and is a matter of course. We do have security systems that can detect anomalous patterns to flag. But we should follow up in more detail on what you're interested in.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say in closing that what we have here is clear evidence of coordination between Twitter, Google, and Facebook. Mr. Zuckerberg knows he has the tools to track this, but he either doesn't remember or won't commit to letting us see it. We have evidence of Facebook tracking its own users all across the web. Mr. Zuckerberg won't answer questions about it, can't remember the name, isn't sure if the tool is deployed in this way, and won't commit to giving us basic information. I submit to you that this is both totally unacceptable and totally predictable, because it is exactly what these tech companies have done to the American people and to Congress for years now, which is why it is time we took action against these modern-day robber barons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm, as you know, the lead Democrat on the antitrust subcommittee, and I'm going to take a little different approach here than Mr. Hawley did when it comes to competition policy, because I understand why they might be coordinating when it comes to security. What I want to focus on is what I think we're seeing all over this country, not just in tech. We're seeing a startup slump. We're seeing more and more consolidation. And throughout history, we've seen that is not good for small businesses. It's not good for consumers. And it's not good for capitalism in the end. Even successful companies, even popular companies, and even innovative companies are subject to the antitrust laws of this country. When I asked Mr. Pichai about this at the Commerce Committee hearing a few weeks ago, he told me Google was happy to take feedback, and my response was that the Justice Department already provided feedback in the form of a federal antitrust complaint. And I know there is investigation reportedly going on out of the FTC right now regarding your company, Mr. Zuckerberg. So I want to start with exclusionary conduct regarding excluding smaller competitors by limiting interoperability with the Facebook platform. The investigation that we saw in the House recently gave us a number of examples of companies, excluded companies, including Vine, Stacklum, MessageMe, and Arc. And my view is this conduct, exclusionary conduct, not only damaged the ability of these smaller businesses to compete, but it deprived customers of convenient access. You're one of the most successful companies, biggest companies in the world, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook. Do you think that this is fair competition or not with regard to the interoperability and how you've conducted yourself with these other companies?
Senator, I'm generally strongly in favor of interoperability and building platform and API access for companies to be able to access. That's why we built the Facebook platform in 2007. Some of the policies that you mentioned, I think, came about because what we were seeing was not necessarily startups, but larger competitors like Google and some of our Chinese rivals from trying to access our systems in order to use their scale to compete with us better. And it just felt to us like at the time that wasn't the intent of what we were trying to enable.
Okay, well, we may have a non-Chinese example here. I just want to know, I know that maybe we could hear from Mr. Dorsey, and I have concerns about Facebook's treatment of Twitter's subsidiary Vine. It's my understanding is that once Facebook recognized Vine as a competitor after Twitter acquired it in 2013, it cut off Vine's ability to interoperate with Facebook so that Vine users couldn't upload their videos to Facebook. And then I think that Twitter shut down Vine in 2016. Mr. Dorsey, could you tell me about the actual impact of Facebook's actions on Vine's business, on Vine's ability to compete, and on your decision to shut down the service? And I know you're not a Chinese company.
Well, I don't know about the intent on the other side, but I know our own experience was we found it extremely challenging to compete with Vine. And ultimately decided that the ball moved past us and we shut it down. Again, I don't know the specifics and the tactics and what was done, but we did find a very, very challenging market to enter, even though we existed prior to some of our peers doing the same thing.
Okay, I'm going to move to something else quickly. Instagram and WhatsApp. We have some released internal Facebook emails in which you, Mr. Zuckerberg, wrote that Instagram was nascent, and if they grow to a large scale, they could be very disruptive to us. And in a later email, you confirmed that one of the purposes of Facebook acquiring Instagram would be to neutralize a competitor. You wrote those emails that were mentioned in that House report. Is that right, Mr. Zuckerberg?
Senator, I believe so, and I've always distinguished between two things, though. One is that we had some competition with Instagram in the growing space of kind of camera apps and photo sharing apps, but at the time, I don't think we or anyone else viewed Instagram as a competitor, as a kind of large multi-purpose social platform. In fact, people at the time kind of mocked our acquisition because they thought that we dramatically spent more money than we should have to acquire something that was viewed as primarily a camera and photo sharing app at the time.
Okay, well, and then here's the issue: is though we don't know how it would have done, and when we look at your emails, it kind of leads us down this road as well with WhatsApp. That part of the purchase of these nascent competitors is to, I'll use the words of FTC Chairman Joe Simons, who just said last week, a monopolist can squash a nascent competitor by buying it, not just by targeting it with anti-competitive activity. So I know that this is a subject of investigation. Maybe we'll be hearing something soon, but I think it's something the committee members better be aware of, not just with Facebook, but what's been going on with these deals that have gone through and how it's had led to more and more consolidation, and how we as the Senate, and I just talked to Chairman Graham about this last week, could actually do something about this by changing some of the standards in our laws to make it easier to bring these cases and not just involving tech. So I want to go to something here at the end, the political ad discussion we had in front of the Commerce Committee, Mr. Zuckerberg. I know you said that Facebook had made over $2 billion on political ads over the last few years. You said this was your, quote, relatively small part of your revenue. I know that, but it's a kind of a big part of the lives of politics when that much money is being spent on ads. This is a bill I actually have with Senator Graham. Yet we have seen these political ads that keep creeping through despite your efforts to police them on your own. And this is why I would so badly like to pass the Honest Ads Act. One ad that went through, it says, in 3 battleground states, ballots marked for Donald Trump had been discarded. Poll, will voter fraud only increase closer to November? So it stated in 3 battleground states, paid ad, ballots marked for Donald Trump have been discarded. This played between September 29th and October 7th, 2020, had up to 200,000 impressions. Does this ad violate Facebook's policy?
Sorry, can you repeat what the ad was?
The ad was an American Action News ad. They've advertised a lot of in your platform, and it said in 3 battleground states, ballots marked for Donald Trump had been discarded. This was pre-election.
Senator, I don't know off the top of my head if that specific ad violates our policies. I'd be happy to follow up.
Okay, would you commit to a policy where actual people's eyes, people could review these ads instead of just being hit with algorithm review?
Senator, we do have review and verification of political advertisers before they can advertise.
Okay, so does every ad go through a human being? Like the
Senator,
TVs do?
I think every our policy is that we want to verify the authenticity of anyone who's doing political or social issue advertising. And I think it's worth noting that our people reviewers are not in all cases always more accurate than the technical system.
So are you saying a human being reviews every ad? It's just really yes or no, or I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Well, we'll follow up then in the written. And then you brought this cease and desist order against NYU for publishing a report that noting over the last 2 years, Facebook has not properly labeled approximately 37 million in political ads. Why would you not support this project? Why would you bring a cease and desist against them?
Senator, is that the project that was scraping the data in a way that might have been
that's your definition,
but it's the FTC consent decree that we have?
The reason it's happening is we haven't passed the Honest Ads Act, but so they're not violating privacy. They're trying to get the ads so people can see the ads, other campaigns, journalists, everyone.
Senator, you know that I support the Honest Ads Act and agree that we should have that passed, and even before that we've implemented it across our systems. But I think in the case that you're referring to, that project was scraping data in a way that we had agreed in our FTC consent decree around privacy that we would not allow. So we have to follow up on that. And make sure that we take steps to stop that violation.
Okay. Last, Mr. Dorsey, do you think there should be more transparency with algorithms? As part of this is not just, and I'm off of the ads now. I'm on just generically. Part of this is that people don't know how this data is going across the systems and across the platforms, and people basically are buying access, has been my impression. So that even if you say, like, what's the news in the last 24 hours, old stuff comes up, something's gone awry from the beginnings of this. Would it be helpful, do you think, if there was more transparency with algorithms?
I do think it would be helpful, but it's technically very, very challenging to enforce that. I think a better option is providing more choice to be able to turn off the algorithms or choose a different algorithm so that people can see how it affects one's experience.
Okay, thank you. And I ask that both of you look at the bill that Senator Kennedy and I have, the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, to help the content providers negotiate with digital platforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Mr. Chairman, I know you've asked the question a couple of times about whether or not these platforms can be addictive. I think they probably can be based on what I've read in one of two ways. They could be just the nature of the personality and engagement in a tool that can that they can somehow relate to. But I also think there's a transactional addiction, and I think you also mentioned social dilemma. I think that's the use of analytics, which I don't criticize among the platforms, but it's the use of analytics to addict you to go down a certain path to produce a certain outcome. And that could either be an outcome forming an opinion or an outcome buying something you didn't even think about 30 minutes before you started going down that path. So I think there are things that we've got to look at, and I do agree with Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey. It's not conclusive, but common sense would tell you it's a problem already, and it could become a bigger problem. Mr. Zuckerberg, I'd like to go back to the task platform for a minute. When I looked at the screenshot that Senator Hawley put up, it looked a lot like a work management tool. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how many people are actually engaged as users on that platform at Facebook?
Senator, yes, thank you. I was a bit surprised by Senator Hawley's focus on our task system because all this is, it's a basic internal project management tool. It's exactly what the name sounds like. It's used by companies, by people across our company thousands of times a day to assign projects and track them. And it's used for all manner of different types of tasks across different people and teams.
And do you know roughly how many Facebook either contractors or full-time employees are actually users of the task platform?
I think that probably the majority of Facebook employees and people we work with have some interaction with the task system as part of some part of their work. It's basically just a company-wide to-do list.
The other platform that Senator Hawley mentioned was the Centra platform. You said you weren't familiar with that one, but I think that is something that would be helpful, maybe as a follow-up, to really understand the nature of that platform. I won't press you on it today because you said you weren't specifically familiar with the name of the tool, but I would be more interested in how it's used. But Mr. Dorsey, does Twitter have a platform similar to the task platform for work management communication among staff?
Absolutely. I mean, even the smallest companies use these tools. We use a tool called Jira.
Yep. I was involved in implementing these in my time in technology sector, so I could see why you have these platforms. But Mr. Zuckerberg, you mentioned you didn't think there was a systematic coordination between Google and Twitter, but you could conceive of how people in similar professions, may have a discussion, have a relationship, maybe talk about it over a beer. So could you see how the skeptic could see how these platforms could be used across platforms to force certain outcomes? Let's say you had 100 people at Facebook, 100 people at Twitter, and 100 people at Google that all had a political bent. They get together, they share notes, and then they go back and make decisions that could make it appear like it's a corporate initiative, but it could be an initiative by maybe some well-intentioned but misguided staff. Could you at least conceive of that being possible?
Senator, I understand the concern, and I think that coordination, specifically on writing the policies or enforcement decisions, could be problematic in the way that you're saying, which is why I really wanted to make sure that it was clear that what we do is share signals around potential harms that we're seeing, whether it's specific content in the aftermath of terrorist attack that people are trying to share virally. So that way, if one platform is seeing it, another platform can be prepared that it will probably see that content soon too. Signals around foreign interference in elections. But I think it's quite important that each company deals with those signals in the way that is in line with their own policies. And that, I think, is very different from saying that the companies are kind of coordinating to kind of figure out what the policy should be. I understand what the concern would be around that, and that's why I wanted to be clear about what we do and don't do there.
No, I agree with that. I would find it horribly irresponsible to think that this was some sort of a systematic approach across the platforms, but just with the sheer numbers of people that you all employ now, I could see how some of what's been suggested here in the hearing could actually occur with just small groups of people trying to manipulate certain outcomes. I don't want to get into details there, except to know that the task platform, if it's similar to ones that I have experience with, has a lot of logging, has a lot of data to where maybe you could do yourself a service by saying, I hear what's been suggested here, but in analyzing the interactions between groups of people and seeing maybe some aberrations, some people being more active and more geared towards one outcome or another, it could actually help you alleviate some of our concerns with the way these platforms are being manipulated. I'm not going to have time to drill down into some of the specific questions. I'm glad to hear that you all are open on some regulatory outcome. I will tell you, if you listen to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle today, I fully expect that Congress is going to act in the next Congress, that we're going to produce an outcome. And some people think that that's not possible because that maybe the Republicans and Democrats are far apart. But if you listen to what they're asking you, they're concerned with a kind of outcome that they didn't like on social media in equal measure. So I do believe that you would be well served to come to the table as an industry and identify things. Mr. Zuckerberg, I like what you've said about transparency. And Mr. Dorsey, I do think that the algorithms, when you talk about the sheer scale, are probably the most sustainable way to go. But we're still going to have some confidence. I like your concept on choice as well. But we're going to have more visibility into what's occurred and what's produced certain outcomes. Like a Veterans Day post that I did after the election. It was actually after my opponent had conceded. I just posted a picture thanking veterans. And for a period of time, I think it was suspended and directing people towards election results. I would like to think, if that was a result of an algorithmic decision, that my opponent, who almost certainly posted a veterans ad, and every other person who was up for election got a similar treatment. Because if they didn't, it would seem to me that there was some other factor in play if these algorithms are being applied to the base of, in that case, political commentary from elected officials or candidates. So I view this hearing as an opportunity to seek your commitment on two things. One, I mentioned to you all yesterday, I've got a intellectual property subcommittee hearing in the middle of December. I would like to have a Facebook and Twitter representative there. I know you're very different platforms, but I think you play very prominently in a hearing that Senator Coons, who's sitting across from me now, would like to have you represented. I think I can speak for Senator Coons that would be helpful, and we'd like to get your commitment to have witnesses for that hearing in the middle of December. Mr. Zuckerberg, can I get that commitment?
Senator, yes, we will make sure that we have the right subject matter expert to join your hearing.
Thank you. And Mr. Dorsey?
We'll follow up with determining the best course of action.
Thank you. And then we'll be following up on a series of questions that I'd like to ask that let me get my head around some of the analytics information that I think you almost certainly have, and hopefully be willing to share it. But we'll do that in a collaborative way in my office. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I think our witnesses have requested a break, and they certainly have earned it. And if that's okay with you, Senator Coons, we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Thank you.